Oh, what to do with those grungy finds from the thrift store? Well, I came up with a couple of ideas that I'm going to share with you today. Maybe it'll give you some inspiration for your next grungy find. Welcome to my channel. Let's get started. My first project is this little wood caddy. Now it's actually not like real wood. The handle is pine. However, the sides and bottoms is a fiberboard, like the kind that pegboards are made out of. So this was a bit of a challenge to come up with something that would look nice on this with that cheap board. So the first thing was to get rid of the paint, and I sanded off what I could, but now I'm applying my paint stripper, the citrus one. I'm going to brush that on to the sections where I couldn't reach with my sander, let it sit for I think about an hour, and then I was able to scrape the paint off. This stripper worked really well, and it didn't make too much of a mess. You clean it up with mineral spirits or probably turpentine, and that removes any of the residue. And I got this pretty cleaned up after I was done removing all of that. I just had to use hand sand just a little bit, any spots that there were pieces of paint left that needed to be taken off. Now I'm going to seal this with 2 coats of shellac to prevent bleed through, and that stain that was on the bottom, I want to block that as well. So I'm going to go over the entire thing once, let it dry, and then give it a second coat. My next step is a coat of my Rust-Oleum primer in flat white. Now I'm going to be making some castings with the amazing casting resin, mixing part A and part B equally till it's clear, and I'm pouring that into this mold. I got this from Amazon, and I will leave the link below in the description box, as well as an entire list of everything I used and links for everything that I can find links for. Most of these turned out pretty good. The one of the turnip, I way over poured it, and there was way too much excess to even think about trimming all that off, so I ended up repouring that one, so I had a better result. So now that our little box is dry, I am going to give this a coat of my white gesso as a base coat. This step isn't necessarily something that you would have to do. Just the finish that was on there with the spray paint, I felt like I needed something else to kind of help smooth it out, give it a little bit more coverage, and something that my paint will adhere nicely to. I'm using Fusion's mineral paint in the color Chateau. It took 2 full coats and then a partial coat to just touch up some areas that weren't completely covered. While that's drying, I'm going to work on my castings. I'm starting off with a color called leaf green for the leaves on my little castings. You can see in the upper left-hand corner there are 2 mushrooms. I did end up painting those, but I did not use them, so I didn't go through the painting process of those in this video. But it was basically the same as what I did on these others, just using some different colors. I will be doing, I think, at least 3 shades of green, and then I'm going to come in with these 2 colors to make a custom color to paint the radishes with. So I'm mixing like a hot pink and a reddish color, or I think it's Santa red maybe. Anyway, it'll be listed in the description box in case you want to know exactly what colors I used. While that paint was still wet, I went in with a straight red and kind of blended that on top of that reddish to give it a hint of the red, but it's still, I wanted it to be a pinkish red, so that way it just kind of blended in there and looked more natural. Next, I'm using lavender and white. I'm going to mix these in with some of that pink. So I have like a light shade of lavender. I pulled up some pictures of different types of turnips, and one of them was this color that I'm trying to recreate, and I thought they were really pretty, so I decided to do that. And so then I will be painting that on my little turnips. I'm using some of that white to brush on to the tops of my little radishes. For the roots of the turnip, I'm using the Fusion Chateau paint as a base color. I'm doing that on the little top part that had like the little parts growing out that were shorter than the long thing of leaves coming off the top. And for the little roots on the radishes, I'm doing a dark brown to start with. And so you can see here, I'm going back and forth, and now I'm adding that brown onto the turnip. And this is what I'm going to be doing from here on out with these castings. I'm just going to add different colors in on top of each other, blending some of them, dry brushing some of them, whatever gives me the look that I'm going for until I'm happy with them. And with a lot of these, I do add just a little bit of water to the paint so that it will flow nicer and not fully cover the color that's underneath it. And in some cases, I actually use a baby wipe to help dab off the excess. So now in this step, I'm taking Barnwood. It's a lighter color. I'm going to brush that on and then wipe it back with a baby wipe. I wanted to lighten the roots up a little bit, but still have those darker colors showing through from underneath. Now back to the leaves, I am taking 3 different shades of green. I'm going to water these down, and starting with the darkest color, I'm going to do kind of a wash onto those to get that down into the crevices of the castings. And then I will just move forward with each shade going lighter and lighter, blending those colors together. This will give me more variation of color in the leaves. And then once that's dry, I go back over with a nice bright green in kind of a dry brush fashion to add some more color back into those leaves so they don't look like they're, withering. I didn't want them to look like they're dying, but I just wanted all those various shades in the leaves. Now I'm taking two of the brighter shades of green and mixing those together to create this color. I'm going to brush that on, and then we will be almost done with these. I have one more step to do. My last step is Dixie Belle's Van Dyke Brown Glaze. I'm going to brush this on. I started off with just putting it on the roots, but then decided to do the entire casting, brushing it on and wiping it back, and it gives it more of a kind of a vintage antique look. So now for the box, I have some drop cloth that I cut into 3 rectangles. I have folded in about a 1/4 inch around the edges and pressed them down with my iron. And this is a longer piece that I'm going to drape on the inside and outside of the box. I'm taking Fabri-Tac glue to glue down those seams. This is something that could also be sewn, but I'm just using glue for this. I'm going to get those edges glued down so I have, a nice finished edge on all of my pieces. I want to apply some transfers to those pockets that I'm going to be adding onto that drop cloth. So I picked out this one from IOD's Seed Catalog. And now I'm taking the smaller ones and I'm just kind of going over and seeing like what might fit, because these are pretty small pieces of fabric. These transfers are a little bit larger. So I finally figured out what I wanted to do. This is going to be for the bigger pocket. So I'm cutting out the peas separate from the text and then cutting the text into sections that I can use so that I can get most of this transfer onto this larger pocket. I get it laid on where I think I want it to be so I can just trim off the excess. It'll make it easier for me to transfer this on. And just like you would on any other surface, it's the same process. Remove that backing, press down the transfer, and use the little transfer tool to get it adhered. Once I have that on there, I take that carrier sheet and rub over really well on top of the transfers to burnish them down. So now I'm adding the texting that I want on there. And I'm going to start with the bigger one at the top and then line up the other ones the way I want them and get these all on there. I decided for the 2 smaller pockets to go with this one transfer. I can cut it in half and put 1/2 on each of the pockets. It fits perfectly. I'm using DIY's liquid patina to seal these transfers onto my fabric. I have used Mod Podge before, and on fabric it tends to turn the fabric really dark and makes it really stiff. The liquid patina does not do that. It works, to me, it works a lot better on fabric. It did darken this one a little bit, but they're still soft and pliable. So I'm much happier with the liquid patina than how the Mod Podge worked on fabric. So now it's time to apply that larger piece onto my box. So I've got it in place, down in this, pressed down in the center and draped over onto the side, so I know exactly where to glue this down. I'm going to do this one outside edge first, and then I will repress down the fabric into the center of the box so that I get the other side in the right place so that it's even with the first side I did. And then I will apply just a little bit of hot glue down in the bottom of that box to hold that fabric in place, and then drape down the other side and glue that. Just to add a little bit of definition to the edges of my pockets, I'm going around them with StazOn ink in Timber Brown. Not around the top of the pocket, just the sides and bottom. With that done, I'm going to glue these into place with my Fabri-Tac glue. So now I have these two pieces of transfer from, one is from Ephemeral Melange and the other one is from the Seed Catalog. I'm going to cut these up and use them on the bottom ends of my box. I laid out my little castings there so I could see where I wanted the wording to go. And I'm just going to go ahead and transfer that on there the same way I did onto the fabric. To apply my castings, I'm using Turbo Tacky Glue. I had to water it down just a little bit because it's quite thick. Normally I use my Titebond wood glue, but the one I have is yellow and it doesn't dry clear, and I did not want any of that yellow coming out from underneath these onto my nice, clean box. So I went with this and it worked just fine. I placed these on there where I felt that they looked good, wiped off any excess glue around the edges, and then let them set. I did this on both sides of the box, so they're pretty much identical except for the wording underneath the castings. Next, I'm taking some jute twine. I just want to wrap this in about an inch in towards the center on either end instead of wrapping the entire handle. I just wanted to add a little something on those edges there where the handle meets the side of the box. But you'll have to let me know what you think. Should I have done something else? Should I have wrapped the whole thing? I mean, I think it looks okay, but I don't know. In a way, it's kind of missing something. I don't know, maybe it's just me. So now I'm burning off the fuzzies with my lighter. and I actually ended up getting a burn spot onto my box, so I did have to go back and touch that up with paint. The last step is to seal up those castings and transfers on the end pieces with my DuraClear matte varnish. I use a bigger brush for the more open spaces and then a small brush to get in around all those little detailed areas of the castings. So here is another look at the before and now after. My next project is this terracotta wine chiller. A very heavy, substantial piece, but it was really stained and marked up and had an odor to it that was very off-putting. I ended up soaking it in hot soapy water for quite a while, scrubbing it really well, let it dry, and it still had a smell to it. So I sealed it in with my clear matte sealer, and then I gave it a coat of my white the flat white primer spray paint. That took care of the odor problem, and I was able to move on and start working on this piece. I'm using IOD Sunflower mold, dusting my mold with cornstarch first, and I'm going to make the smaller flower and the stem and some leaves to put on the front of that wine chiller where it was indented with the writing. I want to cover that up, and I thought this would be a nice little summery look. I'm going to make this look like faux cement. So I've got my casting out, and now I'm going to go around the edges with some water on my finger just to smooth all those little edges out. And then I'm going to glue this down with my Titebond wood glue. I'm pressing down very gently to make sure it is adhered but not distorting my casting. And I'm using a small paintbrush just to remove any excess glue around the edges. Now I'm taking out the stem, and I will put that in place with that wood glue as well. And then I will attach 2 of the leaves. I let this set up for a little while, but not completely dry, and now I'm applying DIY's Old School. This paint goes on looking quite dark, but when it dries, it lightens up. That's the DIY paint gets lighter when it dries, not darker like most other paints. This will be my base foundation for my cement look. I do paint the inside of this as well, but it was a bit of a challenge because this is pretty narrow on the inside. It was hard to get good contact with the paintbrush, but with a little bit of effort, I was able to get it done. Next, I took some salt wash and mixed it into that paint. I'm going to be adding this around the edges of my castings, and you can also use baking soda for this. I do like the texture of the salt wash, but either one would work fine. I'm starting in just around all those areas that need to be kind of filled in, where the castings, they tend to lift up just a little bit when drying. And then I took a bigger brush and stippled this on to the rest of the container. When that was dry, I took Dixie Belle's Hurricane Gray chalk paint and started out on the inside so that could dry while I worked on the outside. And I'm stippling the best I can with my brush down there on the bottom portion. And then I'm using a moistened sea sponge to get the rest of it that I just couldn't get with that brush. I'm going to continue that same process around the entire outside of the container. I'm not going for full coverage here. I'm just adding one layer on top of the previous layer, and I'm going to do this with several different colors to achieve the depth and realism that I'm going for. Next, I'm using burnt umber to add a little bit of brown. I'm taking 2 shades of green to do the same process with that moistened sea sponge. Taking one color, then I blend in the other color and just kind of blend those together on the surface with my sponge. So now I'm taking another gray color that I thought would be dark enough to create some shadow around the flower. And so with a very small artist brush, I'm just painting this around the entire sunflower and the leaves and the stem. But it did not darken it up enough, so I address that a little later on. So now I'm going back in with my Hurricane Gray just to mute down the greens and the browns a little bit, just kind of blending that over those to make them be more in the background. I'm pushing them back with this light coat of paint. Next up was this color called Ash Gray. Now I'm going to start lightening this up a little bit, so I'm taking gray and white and mixing that into a really light gray. I'm going to sponge that all over with my large sponge dauber. And I do use a couple of these lighter colors on the inside down a couple of inches just to give it a more finished look. Now I'm mixing Barnwood with white to make a really pale taupe color. Once I got to this point, you could no longer see any of the green, so I am going to go back in with those greens I originally used, just adding a little bit, and then I'm going to go back over those with some of the lighter colors to tone them back down, but I did want to still be able to see them poking through, so that's why I went ahead and just redid it. I know it's redundant doing it twice, but I wanted more of that to show than it did. So I'm just now going back in and toning that green down. I'm taking some of the white to make that sunflower casting really pop. Now to address my shadow issue that didn't turn out the way I wanted to, I'm using DIY's liquid patina to apply some Dixie dirt. I'm going to brush this on around the edges of the casting, and while it's still wet, I will scoop on my Dixie dirt, let it dry, and then I will brush off the excess Dixie dirt, and then I'm actually going to go over it with some more DIY patina, but I'm going to add colorant to it so that we get a nice dark shadow, because the Dixie dirt is ash color, so it's just like a light gray. So on its own, it doesn't stand out that much on this particular piece. So that's why I'm going to do it the way I'm doing it. Now this is completely dry, so I'm going to go ahead and brush off all that excess Dixie dirt. This does make a bit of a mess, but in the end, I think it's worth it. So I'm going to use some of the gray paint to color my liquid patina. And that wasn't dark enough, so I added some black paint, but I got too much black paint. So then I needed to add more liquid patina and some more of the gray, and I didn't want to waste any more product. So what I did was I used the mixture I had, painted that on with a small brush, and then I had a separate cup of just the liquid patina to go in and kind of dilute that down, because I didn't want like a bright black line. I wanted it to be more subtle. So I'm going to go ahead and do this around the entire casting. And then I can come back in and I'm going to actually touch all that up by responging some of the lighter colors up close to that black line, so it blends much more naturally into this piece. So I started out with the gray, and now I'm adding a little bit of the green, and I'm just going to keep working with this until I get the look I want, because I had again canceled out some of that green by putting the Dixie dirt on there. So, you know, a lot of lessons to be learned here about how to not have to do something 3 times on a project. But now I'm adding the lighter colors around there. And then I'm going to do a final coat of white very lightly, just to re-highlight that sunflower. Now I got ahead of myself and forgot a step before I added my twine and a hang tag on here. So I ended up having to take that off and complete my final steps. I mean, I forgot to seal it. I forgot to do my splatters. So I'm taking my dark brown paint, the burnt umber, watering it down and doing some splatters. And I do avoid the sunflower. I thought about doing it all over it, but I thought it might be kind of nice if I just left it kind of the star of the show and just did the splatters around the sunflower onto the rest of the container. I did the same step with some black paint, but I got some pretty big droplets on there that just stood out more than I wanted. So I did touch those up by going in with my gray and white paint, just to kind of push all those back into the background again so they look more embedded and not sitting on top of this, like, you know, that's how it would look with real cement. They wouldn't be just sitting on top. They would be down into all those little crevices. I finished this up with 2 coats of my matte clear sealer, re-added that jute twine and hang tag, and here's how this one turned out. want to thank you so much for watching, and I do have more summer type DIYs coming your way. Should be out next week. So once again, thanks for hanging out with me. I hope that you find my content useful and will like and subscribe to my channel. But more importantly, I hope I've inspired you to go create something. See you next time.